Hello students, welcome once again to my YouTube channel, and in succession to the topics what I have been taking up in biochemistry, since I have been taking up vitamins these days. So in succession to those topics, from now onwards I'll be taking up the vitamins, particularly the B complex vitamin, and today's topic of the discussion is mainly focused upon the most important, the very important, the first member of the vitamin B complex series. It is the vitamin B1. So students, beginning with, since vitamin B1, it has been called given another name such as the anti-neuritic vitamin or the anti-beriberi vitamin. So students, the fact what I need to emphasize that why these names have been given to it. Anti-neuritic, the word itself is suggesting that it is somewhat associated to any kind of, if the deficiency of vitamin B1 occurs, it can cause peripheral neuritis. So the vitamin B1 has been given another name, that is the anti-neuritic vitamin, because it prevents the inflammation of the peripheral nerves. Why? And the term anti-beriberi, because the most common deficiency disease what is associated with vitamin B1, it is the beriberi, and since this vitamin inhibits the formation of beriberi disease, it inhibits the occurrence of it, so that's why it has been termed as the anti-beriberi vitamin as well. So students, while looking at what are the dietary sources, so the fact what I need to emphasize over here, it is because the diet what is very rich in it, these can be looked upon as the meat, the eggs, the brewer's yeast, the chicken, whole grains, that is rice and wheat, that too the whole grains what are not processed. After the cultivation, there is some kind, after cultivation, and when the rice and the wheat, they have been harvested from the fields, what it is done, it is mostly seen that those rice and grains, immediately after their harvest, a thin layer of a brownish or a deep yellow tan is present over these grains. And while during the process of processing, whenever these grains are processed in the factories, when this polishing occurs of these grains, there is a loss of the bran. There is going to be there occurs a loss of this superficial covering of the rice, that is the rice bran is removed, and that rice bran is the richest source of vitamin B1. So it is particularly, when looking at the richest sources, it is the wheat grains or the whole grains which are non-refined. So the non-refined wheat grains and the rice that is unpolished, those are the richest source of vitamins. Apart from that, another very important sources can be looked upon at is the nuts, the whole grains, as well as the oil grains. So the oil grains what are present, they are all having a very rich, they are rich sources of vitamin B1. So students, this was all about the dietary sources. So these were the dietary sources for it. And now moving on to the types, or the how this vitamin B1 and what are its biochemical functions. So mostly it is seen that the most important functions what are associated with vitamin B1, it is that it acts as a very important coenzyme in the various biochemical reactions of the body. So whatever the biochemical reactions, whether it be the glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the fatty acid synthesis, the gluconeogenesis processes, so the the carbohydrate catabolism, so all the catabolic reactions in which the catabolism of the food products, whether it be the carbohydrates, whether it be the proteins, whether it be the alcohol, so whatever the catabolism is there, vitamin B1, which is which is also called as the thiamine, it acts as a very important coenzyme in the catalysis, in catalyzing the various biochemical reactions. So students, there are basically three forms of vitamin B1 what is available. So in the nature, it has been found that this vitamin B1, it occurs in mostly three forms of it are known. First is the thiamine monophosphate, which is physiologically not that relevant. Next is the thiamine diphosphate, or which is also known by the another name of thiamine pyrophosphate. And third, it is the thiamine triphosphate. So these three forms of the vitamin B1 are being mostly found, and in nowadays in the currently in recently there has been found another types of the very important types of vitamin B1, that is the thiamine. It is also occurring in the adenosine thiamine diphosphate and the adenosine thiamine triphosphate. So the adenosine thiamine diphosphate and adenosine thiamine triphosphate, these are the recently found forms of vitamin thiamine or the vitamin B1. So out of all these forms what are seen, the most important or the most physiologically relevant the form, it is the thiamine diphosphate, which is also called as the thiamine pyrophosphate. So students, and the very important role as to this thiamine pyrophosphate or the thiamine diphosphate, the most important step in what it is involved, it is responsible for the transfer of 2 carbon units from a particular compound. So it is mostly associated with those chemical reactions which are usually associated, which are usually catalyzed by the enzyme which is called as the dehydrogenase. Because as we can find during the process of dehydrogenation, or whenever whatsoever reactions they are being catalyzed by the enzyme dehydrogenase, it is mostly seen that there is elimination of one carbon dioxide molecule, there is an elimination of a carbon dioxide molecule, and in addition to it, there is conjunction of one molecule of coenzyme A. So coenzyme A is being conjuncted and the elimination of a carbon dioxide molecule occurs in the enzymes what are catalyzed by the enzyme, that is the dehydrogenase. Now, why these biochemical reactions are occurring in the body? Just because the ultimate motto, the ultimate target is to yield energy in the form of ATP. So whatever dietary consumption what we are having, for example, the most important dietary constituent what we take, it is the glucose. So now this glucose during the process of glycolysis which occurs in the cytoplasm, the final product what is formed, it is the pyruvate. Now at the step of the pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound, the enzyme what takes place, if this pyruvate it is exposed, if it is under the aerobic conditions, if it is exposed, if this pyruvate it is having a fate where the oxygen is present. Now this pyruvate, the fate of this pyruvate in the presence of the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase, what is going to happen is, okay, what is going to happen is that this pyruvate dehydrogenase what is there, it basically causes elimination of one carbon dioxide molecule, and what else, it causes an addition of a coenzyme A molecule. So this step of the aerobic cycle where pyruvate is being converted to acetyl-CoA and which is further used in the TCA cycle or the citric acid cycle for the yielding of ATP. Now this acetyl-CoA what is being formed from this pyruvate, it is chiefly involving the most important vitamins, that is the thiamine pyrophosphate, which is vitamin B1, the FAD, which is vitamin B2, in the presence of niacin, which is the vitamin B3, and finally the lipoic acid or the CoAsh, which is the pantothenate. So this step is catalyzed by the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase. So the ultimate fate is that coenzyme A, this vitamin B1 in the form of coenzyme A, which is the thiamine pyrophosphate what is being involved in this catalysis, it is very important. It is very important what we see. Okay, I'm focusing it. You can have a look. So this was glucose. From it, the pyruvate has been formed, and this pyruvate is going to get finally converted into acetyl-CoA in the presence of the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase. As I've already said, that wherever the enzyme dehydrogenase is being added, there is elimination of a carbon dioxide molecule and addition of a coenzyme A moiety. Now, this was happening in the aerobic conditions. Now, in the next, what fate this pyruvate can meet? In the next fate, what is found that if there occurs an anaerobic conditions, so this pyruvate can get converted into lactic acid. So this can lead to the formation of the lactic acid, and finally that can cause lactic acidosis in the individual. Now this lactic acidosis, what is mostly seen, that will ultimately lead to the high anionic gap metabolic acidosis. So the finally high anionic gap metabolic acidosis, what is being caused in the blood, this is chiefly responsible for the lethargic or the tiredness of the individual, because this is the anaerobic conditions, and the conversion, this glucose, when it is in the anaerobic conditions, when it is subjected to, that leads to lactic acidosis, which is chiefly responsible for the tiredness, lethargicness condition, or the fatigability. So most important thing, it is the high anionic gap metabolic acidosis, which is chiefly responsible for the poor it is because of this high anionic gap metabolic acidosis, we find that it inhibits the process of the release of acetylcholine from the neurons. So the acetylcholine, what is being released from the neuron, it is inhibited, and that leads to the sluggishness or the tiredness of the individual. So this was all about how this biochemical reaction is being catalyzed. And another, as I have said, that mostly it also participates in the Krebs cycle, and one of the very important rate limiting step in the Krebs cycle, it is the conversion of alpha ketoglutarate to succinyl-CoA in the presence of the enzyme alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. So the rate limiting step, or the rate limiting step, what is there, it in the citric acid cycle, it is the conversion of alpha ketoglutarate to succinyl-CoA. And now again, this reaction is also catalyzed by the enzyme alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. So since the enzyme dehydrogenase is being again acting over here, so there has to occur an elimination of the carbon dioxide molecule, and the succinyl moiety, what is present, that has to be associated with a coenzyme A, because in conjunction to the decarboxylation, in conjunction to the carbon dioxide loss of molecule, there occurs an association on there occurs a conjunction of the coenzyme A molecule as well. So the final product what is formed is the succinyl-CoA. So this was all about as to what are the role of vitamin B1, that is the thiamine pyrophosphate, in the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, which are the very important biochemical reactions which finally yield ATP, which is the energy currency for the body. It yields in the energy. And finally, moving on to the next very important biochemical pathway, that is the which is also known as the pentose phosphate pathway, or the HMP shunt. So during the process of HMP shunt, glucose is being finally the glucose has been shunted, and in this step, the trans-ketolase enzyme, it is entirely dependent on the thiamine pyrophosphate. So this time it is entirely, that step of the HMP shunt is entirely dependent on thiamine pyrophosphate. And lastly but not the least, as I have said, that if there is a high anionic gap metabolic acidosis, what is going to happen is there is inability of the exchange of ions across the nerve cell. So the nerve cell is unable, the ionic influx and the efflux of the ions, what takes place in the nerve cell, that ultimately causes the release of the neurotransmitters. So in the absence of this vitamin B1, what is going to happen is the discharge of the neurotransmitters, the release of the neurotransmitters is inhibited. So another very important function of vitamin B1, it is in the synthesis of acetylcholine. And since this function is very, very important, so it is indirectly associated with the transmission of nerve impulse. So students, the fact what I need to emphasize over here, that through this we can very easily make out that vitamin B1 is very, very important for the conduction or the transmission of nerve impulses. So this was all about the biochemical functions of vitamin B1, its role, and moving on to the next very, very important, the deficiency symptoms. Hi. So the deficiency symptoms of vitamin B1 can be looked upon as on a general overall view. What do we find is that initially there is a loss of appetite. So there is the satiety center in the hypothalamus of the brain. So in the cases of vitamin B1 deficiency, what happens is there the satiety center is already having such a signaling of the body occurs that the person feels always satiated, and the dietary intake is there, dietary intake is reduced. So there is anorexia or the loss of appetite. Moving on, that there is can occur weakness or muscular paralysis, since the nerves they are getting inflamed, the transmission, the acetylcholine is not being synthesized, so that can lead to overall weakness. There can occur constipation, nausea, mental depression, because the acetylcholine is chiefly responsible for the transmission of the nerve impulses. So in the brain, it is ultimately going to affect, it is ultimately going to manifest in the form of mental depression. And some cases it has been also found that irritability also occurs, and in many of the cases there occurs peripheral neuropathy. So this was about in a general the deficiency symptoms, and the most common deficiency disease what is associated with vitamin B1 deficiency, it is the beriberi. So beriberi, the literal meaning of the word beriberi is unable to walk. So from this word, what we can make out that it is going to affect, it is going to impair the proprioceptive sensory neurons, the long neurons, the impairment of the sensory proprioceptive neurons from the extremities of the hands and feet, thereby causing a tingling sensation, the pin prick appearance or the needle prick appearance in the fingers and toes. There can occur numbness, there can occur paralysis of that particular organ or a limb, both that particular limb. So it is the most common, the deficiency disease what is there due to vitamin B1 deficiency, it is the beriberi. Now looking at the very brief historical background. So historical background, it was a Japanese, you can say he was a Japanese surgeon commander who used to work in the Japanese Navy, and he found that during the voyages of the ship, during the voyages, there were two types of sailors. One were having the Western folks, the Western sailors who were having a very rich diet which comprised of cereals, legumes, green vegetables, nuts, the yeast, everything. They used to have a very rich nutritive diet, and those sailors, they were having as such no ailments. They got no diseases during the long voyages. Whereas on the other hand, there were some poor sailors who were improperly fed, or they were constantly consuming the refined grains such as the white rice. So the white rice is the worldwide most common cause for beriberi. So such sailors, they were mostly ill during the voyage. There were times, there were 3 to 4 months, whatever, during the line once voyages, those sailors got sick, and they were having difficulty in walking. They were having the edema, or the swelling in the legs, and they used to, just because they were unfed properly, they were not having a rich diet which was comprising of the cereals and legumes, and they were entirely fed on these refined grains, so they developed the symptoms of beriberi. So it was Takeki, uh, this Kanehiro, who for the first time, who in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 19th century, it was he who pointed out that it is the continuous consumption of refined grains, the refined rice, which is causing the condition of beriberi. Now, this is all what I have discussed. Now moving on to the types of beriberi. So students, the fact what I need to emphasize, that on a broader perspective, this beriberi can be of many types. It can be an acute beriberi, it can be a dry beriberi, it can be wet beriberi. So this acute beriberi is mostly found in babies, but on broader aspect, what is most commonly found, it is the wet beriberi and the dry beriberi. So the striking distinguishing facts between them, the differentiating features I'll be taking up. In dry beriberi, there is going to occur peripheral neuritis, means the extremities, the peripheries of the body, that is the hands and the feet, the nerves, they are going to get inflamed, and there can occur a pin prick or the needle prick appearance. So these needle pricking and the numbness of the extremities, the muscles what are responsible for movements, they may show partial paralysis. The legs, there can occur the impairment in the walking itself. The legs become very painful. Patients find unable to walk. So it is just because the peripheral nerves, they are getting inflamed. The dry beriberi, it is mostly manifested, and it is, as I've already said, the neurological manifestations are seen in dry beriberi. The muscles which are supporting the legs for walking, they become weak, and sometimes the walking becomes very, very difficult. The patients who are people who are deficient in vitamin B1, the walking for them becomes very, very difficult, and sometimes what it is seen that the affected individuals, they depend on support for walking. And in severe conditions, if the muscle paralysis or the neuritis is to such an extent, there is also found that the patients may be bedridden for a very, very long period of time. They can be bedridden, and if they are not treated, it can ultimately lead to death as well. So students, this was about the manifestations what are seen in the dry beriberi. The most important fact that there is a sensory proprioceptive impairment of the sensory nerves without involving the motor nerves, means the motor functions, the motor supply to that particular limb is perfectly maintained. But since there is an impairment of the proprioceptive sensory nerve fibers, the stimulus, the impulses from the extremities, they are unable to reach to the spinal cord and the higher centers of the brain, so that there is an uncontrolled waggling gait. The gait becomes, the ataxia occurs, that there is impaired coordination during walking. So these are all manifestations, that is the ataxia. The sensory ataxia occurs because there is lack of coordination between the muscles during walking. So this was about dry beriberi. Now moving on to the wet beriberi. So wet beriberi is a condition where there is going to occur a disturbance in the circulatory system as well as disturbances in the heart. So mostly the wet beriberi, it is the general term for it is that is mostly associated with dilated cardiomyopathy. Why? Because the disturbance is occurring in the circulatory system, and as well as the circulatory system, as well as the heart is also getting involved. So at times when the nerves, the blood capillaries, the blood vessels, they become so fragile, they become so weak that there can occur edematous of the surrounding tissues, the peripheral tissues what are present, since the blood vessels, they have become so weak, so there can occur edema of those particular organs. And since the cardiac output has increased tremendously, and there is decreased peripheral vascular resistance. So since the vascular peripheral resistance systemically is decreased, and that leads to a very high cardiac output. So that can manifest in the form of breathlessness on exertion. There can occur dyspnea. The palpitations can occur where the patient becomes conscious of the heartbeat. There is a fast bounding pulse. The heart becomes weak, and there is generalized edema, swelling of the leg space, and the serous cavities, they become edematous. So this was about the dilated cardiomyopathy, what is seen in wet beriberi. So students, another very important fact, another very important type of the dry beriberi I need to emphasize, it is the Wernickesencephalopathy. What I have written, it is the Wernickesencephalopathy and the Wernickesencephalopathy syndrome. Now, this Wernickesencephalopathy, since as I've already said, that vitamin B1 is very, very important for the synthesis of acetylcholine, because if there is absence of vitamin B1, there is going to occur acidosis, that is the lactic acidosis, and there will occur high anionic gap metabolic acidosis. So when metabolic acidosis is occurring in the blood, there is improper exchange of ions across the nerve cell. So when there is improper exchange of ions across the nerve cell, which is chiefly responsible for the the bursting of the vesicles containing acetylcholine, they cannot be released, and that leads to then impairment of the Wernicke area of the brain. So the Wernicke area of the brain, which is the manifestations, what is seen during Wernickesencephalopathy, that there is a sense of delirium. So the patient is having a state of hallucinations. The patient cannot visualize things clearly. The thinking that there is occurring mental confusion, so irritability. So these all functions are being impaired in Wernickesencephalopathy. And the another very important condition what is associated with vitamin B1 deficiency, it is the VernicaseKorsakoff syndrome. Now, as I have already said, that in case of the chronic alcoholics, what is seen, that chronic alcohol consumption during that period, the body's demand of vitamin B1, that is thiamine, is excessively increased. So in case of chronic alcoholics, since the body's demand of thiamine is increased, and since there is a continuous great loss of vitamin B1, so the syndrome what is associated is it is the Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, and the clinical features what are associated is that such individuals, they are having a loss of memory. There is apathy associated with them, and this apathy you can look upon as that there is the loss of enthusiasm and vigor, as well as the lack of interest is seen in such individuals. Also, in the patients who are suffering from this syndrome, there is to and fro rhythmic motions of the eyeballs. So in the medical terminologies, this has been called as nystagmus, that is the to and fro rhythmic motions of the eyeball. And so this was all about the syndrome, what are associated with beriberi, that is in case of dry beriberi, the classic examples are the Wernickesencephalopathy and the Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, what are associated with dry beriberi. So students, this was a short discussion about the history, the biochemical functions, the dietary sources, the types of beriberi. I have tried my level best to simplify in a short duration. And students, if you do have any queries or comments, you are most welcome to comment me in this comment section. And students who are there on my channel for the first time and they haven't subscribed yet, go and do subscribe my channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon so that you can be further updated for my upcoming videos. Thank you for watching.